So what I want to do with this show beyond the podcast, I hope everybody is a Therapy Insiders listener. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about is, we have a lot of conversations with these awesome guests that do a lot of cool stuff. And we have conversations that are off the record, and we have a lot of fun back and forth before we start recording. And I wanted to kind of talk about some of that, and especially after the podcast, I get a lot of emails and a lot of questions about certain topics that came up. And we talk a lot about business, we talk a lot about marketing and mindset and just how to run a business. So I was really interested in talking about that aside from the podcast. And the first podcast that we did in 2016, we're 3 in at this point. So yes, I know, a little bit late with this show. So we're 3 podcasts in, and the first one was with John Childs from EIM. And EIM, Evidence in Motion, is a big company in terms of continuing education. And they're also owned by Confluent Health, which has a lot of clinics. So it was, when I talked to John, I obviously asked him about not necessarily where his business is now, but I was really interested in how it got to where it is, right? How does a business grow from an idea to a scaling entity? And a lot of times we see these companies like an EIM, like an Apple, like an Uber. I know, that's pretty cool that he gave his cell phone number out. Has anybody tried to hit him up on that, by the way? I think you should test it out. But like companies that you look and see in the news and they have like $1 billion evaluations at this point, you're like, oh wow, they're like an overnight success because they came out of nowhere. Well, that's not true. The companies don't come out of nowhere. Even the unicorn companies that grow and become, have huge evaluations. These companies start with usually small teams, and they start with an idea that is most likely not what it is when you see it scaled. So they have to do what's called this pivot. And the pivot is you start with an idea and it's growing and then it stalls. And you're like, well, we can do one of 2 things. We can just close down shop and try to do something else, or we can see, is our idea better suited for another market? How can we tweak it to make it work somewhere else? And John kind of talked about that. John said that they were a company, they were a continuing ed company, and they were growing, and they were partnered with somebody, and all of a sudden that their one big contract said, we're not doing this anymore. So overnight they went from a growing company to almost dead. And he made a point during the podcast. He said that every company has this moment of, it's kind of like the road, right, where you hit the dead end, and you have to decide. Am I going to figure out how to get past this dead end? Am I going to make a turn left or right, or am I just going to turn around and go back? And I completely agree with him. Like, every single company has that moment of, holy shit, what do we do? And that's a tough moment. That's a tough thing to get through. And they did. They all got together and they accelerated whatever plans they had, and they made it work. And since then, they've become what they are, and one of the bigger continuing ed companies, residency, research, all of that stuff. So if you're going to make it in business, you kind of have to anticipate, you have to expect something like that to happen, right? Business is incredibly hard, and we talk about it all the time, and that's an understatement in itself, right? If you see people running businesses, like I have 3 companies and a 4th one about to launch. And first of all, that's a horrible idea. If you want to get into business, do not get into business with more than one company. Do not multitask. For the love of God, do not multitask. Stick to one thing. Though everybody that says multitasking is bad is absolutely right. Do as I say, not as I do. So when you're running a business, it's you have 2 moments. You have 2 moments that are the easiest in business. The moment where you start a business and the moment when you end a business, whether it's ending because of failure or it's ending because you are bought out, whatever reason. Same thing in the beginning. You're so excited because those are 2 moments of high emotional feel. Like you're really excited or you're really down, or you're really relieved when it's completely over with. Either way, those are the easiest parts. Business growth, success, and everything happens in the middle, in the grind. So you have to be able to figure out, okay, I've learned a ton about business. I've been listening to Therapy Insiders. I've been following Gene. I've been following Ben, my partner Ben Fung, at updocmedia.com. And we've been writing about business. We've been telling you like what to expect. But hearing that and actually going through it are completely different things. So when the moment happens when you're like, oh man, this is it. This is that moment. We're completely down, and then something else happened on top of that. It's that quicksand, right? You're just being pulled down slowly, but you're being pulled down either way, and you feel like this is it. I can't get out of that. The benefit of following us and other business people is that you know what that moment is. Like you're able to recognize that quicksand moment a lot sooner, and you can say, okay, this is happening. And this is what pretty much every single company goes through. And that should be motivating. That shouldn't accelerate the quicksand. That should give you enough rope to figure out, okay, the other companies made it through it. They told me this was going to happen. Now I need to actually make it happen. And the big question is how? Like, how do you get out of the quicksand? And it comes down to, one is the kind of looking at what you've been doing and reassessing your idea. Is my idea still viable? If it is, then you look at what's been successful. Has the marketing been successful? Have sales been successful? Have whatever business entity you're in, let's say physical therapy, for example. Am I getting the right patients? Am I marketing to the right audience? Am I using the best billing methods? All of that stuff, right? So if you're an in-network insurance company, you might say, okay, the insurance rates are just, they don't justify me being in business anymore. Even if I bring in a ton of people, the break-even point is not going to work for me. But if I go out of network, or if I go to cash PT, or if I sell my clinic, those are pivots for you at that point. So you have strategy, right? You examine your business strategy, or you don't, or you say, listen, I'm done. The stress of running this physical therapy clinic is not enough for me, and you move on. So those are your two options when you get to that point of a pivot. But what if you're still struggling, right? What if you're in that grind and you know that I need to still run a clinic, and I looked at my business plan. It seems to be working. I looked at my billing. I looked at everything. It seems to be working, but you're running a ship that just has a little hole that's just leaking somewhere, and you can't figure out what it is. And this goes back to, I'm going to kind of quote my buddy Jamie Schreier in this, is your superpower. And I love it when he calls it that, because in business, a lot of times, especially when you're starting out, you're kind of doing a lot of everything, and you want to save money and you want to save as much as you can. And that's called a scarcity mindset. Instead of focusing on how do I grow, you focus on how do I save? How do I not lose money, instead of how do I make money? And this might sound trivial and might sound silly, but it's a huge deal to switch that mindset to that. And because it really triggers the way you think. It triggers the way you want to grow instead of not failing. And that's a big distinction. I want to grow versus I don't want to fail. And if you don't want to fail, you're just doing as little as you can to be the best of the worst. Versus I want to grow, and you really get into an aggressive mindset of growing. So Jamie calls it your superpower. And again, I really agree with him, because he figured out that, and he was on the podcast as well, he figured out that you have things that you really enjoy doing, right? And you have to figure that out. And that's self-awareness, throwing that out to Gary Vee. When you have self-awareness and you know what you really like to do, you want to go after it. And there's a lot of famous quotes. Steve Jobs talking about, you need to do what you love or you're going to fail, paraphrasing. Similar kind of idea. So if you have a superpower, if you have something that you enjoy doing, you need to focus on that. And you need to figure out stuff that you don't enjoy doing, stuff that you dread. The paperwork, the hiring, the interviewing, the performance assessment, the marketing, whatever it is. We all have things that we just hate doing. Taxes coming up, if you don't have a bookkeeper, which was one of Jamie's things. And if you push that off to somebody else, like if you had a scarcity mindset before, you would say, I don't want to pay money for somebody to do this. I'll just grit my teeth and do it because I'm the business owner. Versus, okay, I'll take a portion of whatever your financial breakdown is, and I'm going to pay this person, and that's your ROI. Your ROI, your return on investment, can be so much more than just money. It can be ROI on your happiness in business, and when you become enthusiastic about what you do and you focus on those things, your business will grow. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly hard to figure that out. and to let yourself do it, to let yourself pay money to somebody else to do something when you're not really paying yourself initially, right? When you're running a business, especially a startup, trust me, one of my first companies, when we invented a device for neck pain relief, and we didn't pay ourselves for like a year and a half while we were growing. So that's, it's tough, but it kind of goes with the territory where you build the infrastructure. Like if you build a house on a shaky foundation, you never know where your furniture is going to be when you come home. It's the same thing with your company. When you build a company on a shaky foundation, you never know whether you're making money, you're losing money, and that's stressful. And then again, that kind of starts that loop again. Eventually, you're going to get to that quicksand that starts pulling you down. So kind of getting back to the podcast, when I talked with John Childs on that first podcast, he brought up that moment that you have to overcome. And that's the line that really sticks, is you have to overcome. And the more you understand on how to overcome it, the better it'll be. So that was kind of like the business entrepreneurial grind podcast. And I love talking about it because I'm living it now. I still live it. And I get a lot of emails and calls about that. And it's fun as long as you understand what you're getting into. And you have resource. Like now you have so many resources with blogs, with periscopes, with emails, with freaking John Childs giving you a cell phone number. You just got to take advantage. All right, so playing catch up here with all the shows. I don't want to make these things too long. The second podcast was with Stu Mcgill, Dr. Stu Mcgill. And Stu is a renowned researcher and lecturer and an impressive mustache wearer. So if you listen to that podcast, we covered a lot of stuff on his philosophy on treating, which is, I know I'm kind of switching gears really quickly here, so hope you didn't get whiplash from that. So we talked about his approach, which is biomechanical in nature. It's there's a pain generator, there's pain in this area, and we're going to work to figure it out and fix it. And I know a lot of people were really curious how we're going to tackle that, because Urson Religioso, the manual therapist, shout out, has obviously pain science philosophy at this point and background in teaching. So we respect the heck out of Stu, because he's done so much for the field of physical therapy, research, fitness, a lot of things. And we're not really ones to say you're wrong. We want to know, why do you think you're right? And we want to figure out his mindset, and because he's been doing it for a long time and he's helped thousands, 10,000s of people. So we wanted to see, how do you integrate some of that stuff? And he did a really good job of saying that, yeah, he understands Lorimer, and he knows all those pain science guys that are kind of driving that field forward, and he does incorporate some of that, but he also has his way of kind of bringing in some of his biomechanical stuff. And there's things that we still don't know, right? And especially research. Like, to me, research is like a tour guide. When you go on a tour, you might Google the heck out of where you're going. You might see Google Maps, Google pictures of everything. And you might get a tour guide. The tour guide will tell you, okay, yeah, you saw this on Google Maps. This is how it looks in person. And then you see it in person, and you get this whole different perspective of it. And I think that's what research is to me. Research is that tour guide. Like, you might have Googled a lot of stuff. You might have created these perceptions and expectations of things. And then you read the research, and the landscape gets cleared out for you. But you still have to go up on that landscape. What's up, Aaron? What's going on, man? Thanks for joining. You still have to explore the landscape. And that tour guide kind of steps back at that point and says, yeah, go ahead and explore. So to me, research is that tour guide. It's just letting you explore, but telling you, kind of directing you which direction to go. It's not holding you by the hand, telling you you need to go there. You say, I really recommend you check out this place. It's really nice. So that's my perspective on that. And it was really nice to hear Stu's kind of how he integrates that. And he didn't take it personally. He didn't get offended. He says, yeah, of course I use it, but the way I approach it is slightly different. And it was nice to hear. It was nice and refreshing. Thanks, Jeff. It was, if we're not respectful when interviewing people, I know some podcasts are very much like aggressive at that. We really want to entertain. We want our guests to feel like they're having a conversation with us versus defending themselves. And when you're kind of on edge and defending yourself, I don't think that really creates a good environment for anything aside from drama. And some people like drama, and I'm okay with that. That's their thing. But we really want them to figure it out. So then, finally, the third podcast to catch up finally was Jason Shane, a Canadian physiotherapist, and Jason is awesome because he's doing something. He's been around for a while, but he's a fairly new physio. But he's really figured out how to incorporate social media, how to incorporate getting an audience. Because at this stage in the game, if you're not on social media and if you don't have even a basic understanding of digital marketing, then you're behind the eight ball. You're failing already. You just don't know it yet. And Jason has done a good job of building up an audience, but more importantly, building up an in-person audience, which is even harder, I think, than building up a Twitter following or a Facebook following and things like that, because that's pretty easy, right? You can be sitting at your desk and just click like when you see a picture that comes up that you like. But to actually have people come to where you want them to come to, that's incredibly tough. We figured that out ourselves. Between Urson and myself, we have tens of thousands of followers. And when we started the Garage series, we got like 6 or 7 people signed up initially within the first 3 weeks or so. And we're like, oh, that's fantastic. And then we kept focusing on everything else that we did. And we were hoping, and hope and a prayer type of thing, that always works out, right? So we were hoping that people would keep signing up. And we would post something once in a while, and we ended up with like 7 or 8 people coming to the course, which was great. Anyway, it was cool to have that kind of intimate environment, but definitely not the percentage that we thought we were going to get. And we, like anything else, when something like that happens, you figure out why it happened, or you should. And we kind of started looking back to learn from it, right? That the whole point of failing, or at least not succeeding the way you thought you would succeed, is to learn from that so you get better. And if you don't have that kind of mentality, so my analogy with failure, especially in business, is like playing baseball. If you're going to fail 70% of the time. That's why I love baseball. Baseball is a game of failure. It's such a mental game. You're going to fail 70% of the time. So if you succeed 3 out of 10 times, and then once in a while hit a home run and just feel good about yourself, you're doing something right. And it's the same thing in business. Like, you might strike out 3 days or 3 times in one day. Guess what? You get another bat the next day. And so that was kind of our mentality. Should we do the Garage series? Should we not? Thank you. If you're batting 1,000, you're in the minor leagues. That's right. Or you're playing t-ball. So yeah, that's that was our mindset, and we reassessed. We said, listen, with everything that we have going on right now with UpDoc Media, do we even want to do continuing ed courses? Because we're doing the marketing, we're doing the consulting, we're doing crazy kinds of media that we'll be coming out with. That's going to be super time intensive. And but then we went back to it again, and for what we're building, we really want that audience. We really want people to say, listen, not only do these guys produce awesome digital content, but when we went out and saw them, that was one of the best experiences I've had. And having an experience, and you can look up research on this, right? Having an experience creates so much more happiness, enjoyment, and fulfillment than any other thing that you'll buy. So products that you buy, yeah, they might give you short-term happiness, like when you go, the shopping, therapy, and all that stuff. But experiences stick with you forever. People pay for experiences, vacations, and things like that. That's why people pay so much money. That's why movies exist, right? People love stories and they love experiences. That's why you go. That's why Hollywood is, a multi-billion-dollar industry, because you love the experience of putting yourself in a story. And it's the same thing. We want to give people an experience, and we want it to be an in-person experience. So Jason really talked about what it takes to build up an audience, to have that follow-through, to constantly reach out, and to deliver value, which unfortunately has become a watered-down buzzword at this point. But to deliver value, you really have to understand what your audience wants and what will benefit from, and what they can use after that. And that's a really tough thing, not only to create, because it's to create value is not really that hard. To show people that they're going to get value and to have them understand and buy into that, that's the tough part. And I think that's kind of what Jason talked about, and what it takes to have that continual feedback and continual reaching out to this audience have consistency. And consistency is really the big thing. You know, consistency and engagement are the two big things I would say right now for growth, for marketing, for creating an audience. Is you have to be consistent and you have to engage, because people ask you questions like you guys have been asking, and gals, and you have to do it regularly all the time, because if you're not doing it regularly, the flow of information that's coming out now is so quick that you're going to get forgotten. I mean, that's life these days with all the media coming out. So consistency, because I get that all the time. It's people ask me, well, this podcast just came out, this blog just came out. Are you guys worried? Is that competition? I was like, I'm excited. I'm excited that more blogs are coming out. I'm excited that more podcasts are coming out, especially in the world of physical therapy, because first of all, I've moved away from a competition mindset a while ago. I read 0 to 1. If you haven't read that book, it's a really good book by Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal. And I've had these thoughts in my head until I read that book, and it kind of really clarified things that, you know, competition, it's instinctual. You want to compete against people doing similar things to you. But if you're competing with other people, you're focusing on what they're doing and how to do what they're doing better, versus focusing on your product and doing what you have to do to be successful and make your idea, product, whatever, service better to your audience. And sure, you keep track of what other people are doing, absolutely. But if you focus on what you're doing, then you're going to see a lot more growth. And same thing with podcasts and blogs in our world coming out. To me, that's great, because that gives more awareness to all of us. And if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing correctly and effectively, then we've built up such a following and understanding and brand awareness that when a new blog comes up, people are like, oh, this is cool. How do they compare to us? So we become the standard, which is kind of what you want to be. And because we have that consistency, people know that at the end of the day, they can type in updocmedia.com and we'll be there with new content. Whereas somebody that's coming out that is new or just kind of feeling it out, you know, doing a personal blog, they really don't know that, and they don't really know how to trust their information. So I think it's cool. I think it's great that more people are coming out with blogs. I think it's great that more people are coming out with podcasts, because we consume so much information that I don't think we haven't even scratched the surface of too much. So if you're interested in the blog, if you're interested in a podcast, I say go for it. And I think that's great. All right, I'm going to finish out. And I know it's been a little long. I actually have a podcast to record pretty soon. So any kind of closing questions? I'll try to do this once a week. It won't be this long, I promise. I just wanted to catch up on the 3 podcasts that we did. So shout outs to John Childs of VIM, Dr. Stu Mcgill, and Jason Shane at Shane Physiotherapy for being guests on the podcast. And we already recorded a really cool podcast that I really want to tell you about now, but I won't. I want to keep you on the edge of your seats in anticipation for the upcoming episodes. And we have some really, really cool stuff planned from UpDoc Media. So any closing questions? Take a few questions before we sign off. Questions? Anybody? And I'm rubbing my hands because it's cold outside and I haven't got any heat going on in here yet. Any closing questions? Going once. Going twice. All right. So you know where to find me, at Therapy Insiders on Twitter. Tips for maintaining consistency, Mitch. That is a great question. So tips for maintaining consistency is a schedule is great. That's a great way to do it, where you kind of force yourself. I think one of the best ways to maintain consistency is telling people that you're going to put something out in advance. So you kind of put yourself out there already. Say, listen, on Thursday, this is what's coming out, and kind of you want to build anticipation anyway. But if you tell people you're going to be putting it out, then you're already on the hook to put it out, because that's your credibility. So that's a good way to kind of force yourself to do it. The other way to do it is to put out stuff that you really enjoy talking about, writing about, recording, and things like that. Yes, I know the question becomes, well, how do you keep the content fresh and new if you just keep talking about the same stuff? Well, if you really think about how much variation of the stuff that you enjoy there are, I think that you'll find out that there's ways to just rebrand and repurpose the content that you want to do. So that's a good way to stay consistent. And when you build up enough of a a portfolio of stuff, then you start recycling it, which is, I think, one of the most underused things in content is, especially new content producers when they come out, is they feel like it always has to be original, like you always have to do something new. Does the pursuit of perfection get in the way? It does. Thanks, Aaron, for the question. The pursuit of perfection gets in the way until you realize that it's not about perfection. Like my thing is, don't be perfect, be effective, which are two big things, and something that I learned along the way, because I always wanted to be perfect. I wanted everything to be perfect the way that I idealized it, and it never works out that way. Like the way it's in your head is a vacuum, and you have to make it realistic. So I switched away from perfection to effectiveness, and magic happens from there, because there's no such thing as perfect. It doesn't exist. It's a unicorn, right? Perfection is something you create that you think will happen. It's perception. There's only perception of perfection, not reality of perfection, because it's all dynamic. As soon as something comes out, you figure out whether it's good or not, and then you adjust and you learn from it. So the name of the game is effectiveness, not perfection. How's that? Anything else? Before we go to the podcast? Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for joining. I really can't feel my hands. Glad you enjoyed it, Mitch. I thought by now you'd be tired of hearing me talk. Kind of feel like Ricky Bobby. What do I do with my hands? Anyone get that? Anyone? All right, I'm babbling. So I'll catch you guys next week. I'll try to do this once a week after the podcast are released, and we'll kind of go over the podcast. We'll go over some of the business stuff. I really want to definitely delve into some of the marketing, digital marketing content stuff. Like I said, I'm running a few companies, so if you have questions about running a company, question about crowdfunding, I did a Kickstarter campaign and raised 30 grand in 40 days. Did that. I auditioned for Shark Tank. So I have experience in that field, getting ready to start a startup that will need seed funding. So we're going to go through all of that. So if you have questions, comments, anything in those worlds as well as physical therapy, obviously, love to hear about it, talk about it. And we'll be talking about the podcasts as well. All right. So if you need anything else, hit me up at Therapy Insiders on Twitter. My email is Gene, Gene, @updocmedia.com. So if you have questions, and I'm not like John Childs, you will not get my cell phone. So thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time.